when Kathy contacted me, I don't know, it was last fall, early winter, and said, will you come to one of our meetings? I said, I'm kind of retired, and okay, I'll do something, but let's do something different. I could possibly put together a nice PowerPoint presentation that looks very good, that you guys would find kind of entertaining, but then everything, so if you don't go to sleep in the late afternoon, everything kind of dissipates and we don't get anywhere. So I said, let's try a different format that's more dialogue, more kind of applying things that I have sort of as important points to make and have more of an exchange with people. And I know we don't want a lot of sort of back and forth questions later, but let me, for now, present things that tie in with what John says. Maybe make 2 or 3 guideline points and we can go from there. So John's presentation to me was very interesting because it shows the acquired experience of a person that is a good beekeeper, a good observer, and that has developed systems to manage in a very particular environment. We often hear the word beekeeping local, and John has done that very well for this particular region where he's harvesting the product of flowers to make honey and to maintain a sustainable situation. So that's, to me, very useful in zeroing in on what's possible in a locale or in a region. But let me present a couple of additional points that are more like general guidelines or ways of looking into the future for our area of New Mexico, northern New Mexico, maybe southern Colorado, and maybe a little bit more general. So here's my first point that I would present to you as necessary components to get towards this presumed goal of sustainability. Short term, we need to stop losing biomass of honeybees. We need to stop losing our worker force, and we need to get to a situation where the importation of that biomass decreases through time, and we can maintain that in a stable situation and hopefully in some kind of expanding situation. John is there, and it could be his locale, but I think it's also his attention to detail and to following procedures that maintain that situation sustainable. So that's short term as a goal, and I think that's totally doable with a few tweaks and not a lot of extra information. The next point towards sustainability that I would propose is that we need to get to a situation where the genetics of the bees that we're having, be it imported queens from selected strains, locally selected queens, whatever, has to be the vehicle to provide that health in the workers that we're trying to maintain in a sustainable way. That's more of a long-term goal, and it's not for everybody, but I think, and I have proposed this to many groups, it hasn't gone very well in many places, but I think hobbyists and sideliners that have a lot of time and for which making sort of an efficient, economically viable queen and bee operation, where that's not the priority and you're more doing it out of passion and out of interest, that's where you can make some inroads and contribute to the overall health of the situation. And some of you were with us this morning at the apiary, and there's many ways of looking at management of bees these days, but to me, given my bias in what I have researched and what we have sort of been able to show in scientific publications, the central point to bee health and sustainability right now, as my third point, managing varroa. If you disregard that, I would say you're going to fail. If you don't pay attention to managing it in some way or another, through monitoring and through dealing with the colonies that get high infestations, you're not going to succeed. So those are just some general guidelines from my kind of biased research perspective that may be applicable. As they say, the devil is in the details, and we could sit down and think of possible ways of doing this. And later in my talk this evening, all of you are not going to be there, but I will present some ideas that kind of combine well with some of the procedures that John has developed for the area, and it shows some potential. So that's an overarching, very broad presentation of my view on sustainability for this region and what needs to be paid attention to. Very broadly, the devil is in the details, the specifics are important, but I think we globally need to start thinking in that direction. So John, do you have any comments that maybe we can do a back and forth on, or your perspective on what I just said?
A little bit of background on, I've been doing bees for, well, a long time, probably 35 years. And I would come home and after working the bee yards, and I would sit down and have a glass of iced tea. And my wife would say, you can't even get up. You need to kind of rethink this. You're not getting any younger every spring, and I know how much you enjoy going out to work the bees, but have you given any thought to maybe doing any type of research or a little more outreach or being part of maybe some type of educational program or format? So I'll give my wife all the credit. She said, there's money available, there's research grants, so why don't you, in your spare time, go research that a little bit? So I did, and I saw, well, hey, there's a grant, and other people have done this, and other people have done studies on nucleus colonies. So I thought, okay, maybe. But I got to this line, and it said, you need technical advisor. And I thought, I don't have any technical advisors. So in my readings, I remember there were a couple of individuals who I really admired their work and their research. And somehow I got the number or the email for Dr. Villa, and I emailed him and said, hey, I wrote this research grant, and I need a technical advisor. Would you be interested? He said, sure, I'd love to do it. So I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. So that was a really good plus for me, having someone with such a background in bees and genetics and the whole 9 yards. Jose devoted his life towards honeybees and genetics and research. So I'm extremely fortunate to have someone like that as part of our research grant. And as Dr. Lee said, this isn't the end, this is the beginning of sustainable bees within our region and bringing a certain genetics of mite-resistant queens. There's no silver bullet, we've talked about this a lot. The Russian queens, yeah, they're great, and the BSH queens, but they all have certain genetic traits that enable them to manage mites a little bit better than just your average run-of-the-mill queen. So, yeah, having said that, I think next year when we go through these queen yards, nuke yards, and we say, hey, we had 22 here in October, and 10 of them look really great. I'm going to ask Dr. Villa, let's do some grafting. Let's get some queens bred. Let's make those available to other people, beekeepers like yourself, in all parts of New Mexico or the Southwest. That we've got some queens, they do really well. Would you like to kind of share and be a part of our grant and our study and spread that genetics around?
Let me just make a couple more points and then we'll open it up for questions. One question that stumps a lot of us is, people say, okay, so you were saying all these wonderful things are possible, and that if you can find the right genetics, you can probably keep Varroa under control. Where do I start? And then there's a long silence. And what does that mean? That there really is not a very good system to acquire the right genetics at dealing with Varroa mites, which is one of the biggest frustrations that I have as a scientist. So let me just give you an example that ties in with your question. In work that I was doing with other people at the USDA ARS lab in Baton Rouge, where this very specific strain that is not exactly a line of bees, because this characteristic can be found anywhere, called BSH. That's where it was developed and where it got fixed to a really good level, where these colonies, if you challenge them with mites, and high loads of mites if you want, instead of the mites going up in the colonies in terms of number, density, impact, whatever, they go down. That's remarkable to see. And I mean, we have publications where that is shown over and over. We sort of in everyday activities at the lab would use these colonies and see that the mite levels that have been high are low, or that if we want to find mites, we hardly can find mites. That is fantastic. Side by side with those colonies, as I mentioned, we would bring in what we call control colonies so that we could grow mites if we needed them for experiments. So it was very typical in the environment in Louisiana, which is a long season, to get a queen in the spring for these control colonies. Put them in apiaries where we had these other colonies with BSH. And the introduction would happen maybe April, May. Come July, August, these colonies that had grown beautifully were these mite factories loaded with mites. And this was side by side with the BSH. So that perspective is always in my mind. This stuff is great, but taking it from the research apiary to an application where beekeepers are using it a lot has been very slow for us, very frustrating, and we can go over reasons why it hasn't happened, but I would say it still has a lot of potential. But again, getting to that point is difficult, and John and I struggled for the grant with, okay, querying people here and there. Okay, do you have BSH queens? Do you have them available? What kind of reliability can you give us that they are truly BSH? And it wasn't easy, but I think we got a good source. But that's constantly a problem. Now, just to be very specific about a couple of very concrete possibilities that would be a starting point. And it sounds like I'm doing publicity for friends, but there are two guys that are producing instrumentally inseminated queens with a high level of BSH in them that are expensive, but can be a starting point. They're not production queens. They're raised to produce daughter queens from, but the level of BSH is fixed at such a high level that even the daughter queens mated with drones in the area perform pretty well. And the names are Adam Finkelstein of VP Queens in South Carolina, and John Harbaugh, the same guy that first found BSH in Baton Rouge, and his Harbaugh bees. And the queens that these guys produce with II will cost, depending on what crosses you ask for, easily $200, $250 a piece, but those are not production queens. So that's a starting point. Beyond that, it gets really murky, because if you start looking at the commercial breeders advertising for material in the journals, they'll say things that to me are probably not verifiable. If they got BSH, or if they're doing some screening for hygienic behavior. Some of the ads have some wording that is not precise and you have to ask. So buyer beware. So that's a little block of other general ideas with some specifics as a starting point. And I think we can maybe open it for a few questions. How are we doing on time? Next time, people. We have 10 minutes. Mr. Moderator, can we open it for questions, even though it's slightly different from this one? Okay. Mark?
So are you recommending artificial insemination for most areas to manage to get VSH genetics?
No, I don't think I wouldn't recommend it for, except people that are willing to go through the trouble and do it. And to just maintain certain lineages if you want to, but I don't think it has too many technical nuances to recommend for everybody.
The other part of my question is, Tom Seeley was here back in February, and he went back to Ithaca and looked at the genetics of the colonies around his research area, and he found that the genetics had gotten squeezed down, and that they were developing VSH on their own.
Right.
And he found that they were developing it at the same exact rate as scientists were.
Yeah.
So what can you say about that?
I don't know the data that Tom referred to. I know that he has found VSH. I would be hesitant to say that nature can fix VSH as fast as scientists. There's an interesting set of projects in Europe where this guy that was in medical research got into bees. It happens, you know. And he decided, okay, I'm going to try and do in Europe what these darn Americans have done with VSH. And he basically copied the approach that John Harbaugh did, which was you do single drone inseminations, which fixes a colony's genotype to a very narrow range and produces highly variable colonies because you're doing all possible combinations manifested in individual colonies. Doing that on buckfast bees, German bees, he's been able to find rare combinations where VSH is extremely high in the first generation. And then from that, opened it up and propagated that. So I would say that is not for everybody to do, but that is a way of bringing out VSH in almost any population. Is that okay?
That answers my question.
Yeah?
I was reading in the journal, American Bee Journal, that Apis cerana, the Asian bees, have over millenniums of
Yeah.
for one variation, the Varroa Jacoboni or something like that.
Right.
I don't remember the name exactly. But they've kind of become symbiotic in a way. Do you maybe see that maybe the Apis mellifera will become that over millenniums with the Varroa destructive?
Yes, I think it's possible. And actually, there's documentation that the beginnings of that started happening in a number of situations. Several situations in Europe, Tom Seeley's situation in Vermont, in New York. And actually, I have a paper where the suggestion of that started occurring in Louisiana, where when Varroa came, swarming rates of feral colonies went down, longevity of feral colonies went down, and then surprisingly at that time, 7 years after that or more or less, the recovery started happening. Now, this is another pet peeve of mine. That situation seems to have disappeared. And what is the cause of that? A lot of new beekeepers that were bringing in material from other places, and this emerging situation kind of dissipated. There's also some other explanations, but that's kind of the most logical. Yeah?
It just seems like we need like a VSH bred queen like in all these different areas to be a queen that's hygienic and can overwinter in that area or just stay in that area. Would you say that's true? It just seems like you couldn't pull a VSH queen from Carolina and bring it here and necessarily have success, like in the East Mountains or
Yeah,
where it's colder maybe.
that's a valid consideration. And definitely there's local adaptations that are important. But I would say in the big picture, that is secondary to goal number one, which is keeping Varroa at bay. There are kind of different responses to winter, and I have studied overwintering a lot in all kinds of bees, including Africanized bees. But overall, bees' responses to the combination of factors having to do with the onset of winter, cold, clustering, honey consumption, are generally pretty similar. Whether it's an Italian bee or a Carniolan bee, the consumption of honey per bee per time tends to be the same. It's more that the Italians have more bees to feed and therefore you have to be more careful. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does really well. And one more quick question. Do you think us interfering with mite treatment slows down that ability of the bees to genetically be more hygienic?
Okay, that's another good question. In terms of kind of long-term evolutionary trends, definitely treating, you're preventing the appearance or the detection of rare genotypes that are resistant, and you're promoting things that are susceptible.
Right.
That is a good thing to prevent that. But in reality, what I see happening is that these rare genotypes that you might start detecting, if you're not controlling matings or if you're not being very careful with your pedigrees, everything is getting diluted into this morass of genes where susceptibility reigns, just based on numbers. Because if you have a rare genotype that is resistant, but all your neighbors are bringing in queens that are highly susceptible, that's going to get swamped.
Yeah.
So it is kind of a formidable and scary task. That's why I'm saying you guys could be part of the future, but it's going to take some work and some learning from mistakes, and the pathway is not perfectly clear. But I think there's some general guidelines to follow, and I think that's what people like John and I and Mark and Melanie and Craig are trying to kind of promote in the region. Yeah?
One last question. How come we're not approaching this from the Varroa side genetically, so that we're producing a Varroa that is infertile, not as fertile, less
That's another good question, and it's often talked about. My personal view, after some frustrations kind of working with that system, is that the congruence in the life cycle between developing workers and Varroa is a very tightly orchestrated dance of give and take, signals, cues. And to me, it's a very complicated system to tweak. I'll mention this in my talk later this evening, but to me, based on my experience, the things that are robust and reliable and repeatable are using characteristics of bees that are based on their behavior, because they're very easy to select. And they're in some ways pre-existing in some populations at a low level, and with a little bit of selection you can bring up the level to a commercially useful level. Yeah?
Could you tell us the 3 places about the queen bees that you said VP queen and
VP Queen, his name is Adam Finkel. Stein. He obtains material from the USDA lab in Baton Rouge and propagates it and sells breeder queens, instrumentally inseminated. And the other person is John Harlow, and his, I guess, webpage is called harlowbees.com, and he's in Louisiana. Either one of those, I would say, are very reliable in maintaining material that has a very high level of aroa-sensitive hygiene. So that's a very specific thing at a starting point. You guys have been pretty patient.
In addition to the BSH queens that we're really excited about, and I'm just really thrilled that we were able to obtain that strain, I've had very good luck with getting queens of Russian descent from Tabor's Honeybee Genetics in California. I think I did 15 to 20 splits using those Russian-bred queens, and had really good luck with them. I mean, in a nucleus colony setup like this, they were wonderful honey hoarders, and then in the spring you'd open the box and they had as much honey as they did in October when you packed them away. It was like, what did you guys eat? So, very frugal, very good honey producers, nest in very small cavities, so you'd open them up in the spring and you'd say, man, there's only a half a frame of bees here, or a frame of bees. But they had tons of stores, they had prolific queens, but they weren't triggered to really start gearing up production until pollen started coming in. Of course, we get pollen here. Some of my yards are getting pollen some years in January, so once that starts to trigger, they really explode.